the time has come for your first assessment. So you are going to appear for the assessment milestone 1, and we have already covered almost up to milestone 2 as well. That's the reason today I thought of let me just give you a quick recap and a few tips for appearing for the milestone 1 exam. I would like to share some of the questions which I have got during my assessments, because even during my training I have appeared for 4 individual assessment exams before the final assessment. So I would like to share a few tips regarding the kind of questions that you might be getting, and I'm not sure whether it will be the same pattern they will be following for faculty assessments and for student assessments, because during the training we were 15 number from 25 different colleges, and we have 4 assessments during the training of this PBL app for us, and then we had the final assessment. So whatever the kind of questions we used to get, I would like to just give a brief on that so that it might help you for your assessment as well. So we are done up to multi-threading concept. So if we cover this RDBMS, SQL, JDBC, even we are ready for the assessment milestone 2 as well. That's the reason I thought of let me put a comma for this RDBMS, SQL, JDBC and discuss once again very quickly with the topics of up to IO streams and tell what kind of questions might be expected in the assessment exam. For that reason, today I said the session is going to be shorter, and I wished all of you could join the session. And firstly, we have discussed the language fundamentals, and in the Java language fundamentals, I do remember that in my very first day 1, I have discussed and given important things that should be understood, and all that I have discussed is the number systems. That means if a number, integer or character, if it can be represented using started with a 0, then you should understand that it is an octal representation, and if it is started with 0x, you should understand it is an hexadecimal representation. And I have even given the tips of converting one number system to the other number system. All the inbuilt methods I have shown you in my very first day class. So you should be familiar with all those number systems. So don't get confused. If the number is started by 0, it's an octal, and if it is started with 0x, it's an hexadecimal. Just remember all that. But the twist is, I'm just telling, even in my exam, I was not known by that time when I have got this particular bit. So I got confused and I even given wrong answer. Later, during the explanations, I got to know that I have given wrong answer. What I was given was, I was given a character instead of an integer. I got a character variable assigned with this particular value. Even though I know that if it start with 0, something like that, I got confused with the way of asking the question. So let me just show you. So what was asked for me during my assessment exam, and which I got confused and I did not attempted it. So suppose if at all character C is there, even you can store an integer value something like this. So even you can store an integer value like this, because it is legal in Java. Without any explicit casting you can do. I was known about this, and even this is legal, because the only point need to be understood is, so character in Java is of 16 bit. That means unsigned 16 bit. So you now In this case, what happens is, if you observe, if it is 1 2 3 4 5 6, you cannot accommodate it, because you know that 16-bit unsigned integer means the character value ranges from, if it is 16-bit, you already know that 0 to 2 power 16 minus 1, that is 0 to 65,535 values can be stored. But when I am storing 1 2 3 4 5 6, it is exceeding the range. It is exceeding the range. So this cannot be stored directly. But if 0 is prepended, now it can be stored, because now it's no longer 1 2 3 4 5 6, it is the octal representation. And when you convert it to decimal value, then it becomes less than this 65,535, whatever the maximum value. So this need to be understood by you. So when it is octal representation, you should understand the fact that it must be within the unsigned 16-bit value, that is 65535 value. So this is what one confusing question which you can expect, I mean which I got it. And similarly, if I have something like this 0x abcd, it is also valid declaration, because 0x is nothing but hexadecimal representation, and abcd, when you write in 4 bits, because hexadecimal means 4 bits, a group of 4 bits na. So abcd, it's fine, because altogether each character represents 4 bits, and it's 16 bits, it's fine. But when I add another digit to it, then automatically you cannot store that, you cannot store into the character. So such minute things need to be understood as part of the data types. And you need to be very familiar with all the floating precisions also. So this is one which you need to understand with respect to the character. So character by default can store integers, that too within the range of unsigned 16-bit, which is 0 to 65,535, and it can be octal or hexadecimal, that can be fit into that 16-bit. So this point need to be understood. And regarding float also, you need to be understood that, suppose if I am having some float f equal to, I already said you that you can't write directly like this, because by default all the floating values in Java are double. So you can't directly write like this, so compulsory you need to append it with f. Now what if I am directly writing something like this? Then it's no problem, because by default integers can be stored into float. So this point also need to be understood. And similarly, the hexadecimals also can be stored, and its range is quite longer than the character. Here you can see now, I'm not appending it with f, but still, since I'm writing it 0x, it's automatically understood as hexadecimal, and now its range is longer. That's the reason here you can see up to that certain level it is able to accommodate. So all these things need to be understood, because not very complicated questions you will be getting in the exam also. This point need to be understood. The questions will be of very simple only, but only thing is, all the options you will be finding it very closer. That can be only identified only if you have already explored it once. Unless you explore it once, it will be difficult for you. So float, appending it with f, it's only for real values and not for integer values. For normal integers or octal or hexadecimal storage into a float, it doesn't matter, you append it with f. By default integers can be stored into a float variables. So at that time you don't require any appending of f. Only when you have some real values, then only it's mandatory to append it with f. And that f can be small or capital, don't get confused in the exam if you were being asked also. And similarly, even you can store a character something like this. A character can also be stored as a single, or you can also store it as a with a slash u, and something like this. This is fine, even though what it is going to store, it's unnecessary for us, but slash u represents unicode representation. That's the point need to be remembered. So slash u represents unicode representation. So hexadecimal you can store, but up to 4 characters only. When you are storing hexadecimal, just remember that up to 4 characters. If you find fifth character, that means after 0x, if you find fifth character, then say you will be getting compile time error. Up to 4 characters of hexadecimal, it's fine. And coming to octal, starts with 0 and up to 5 digits, you are sure that you can store it, but sixth digit is also permitted depending on the number given, because you need to convert it to integer, I mean decimal, and find out that value is less than 65,535, then it can be stored. And coming to representing something like this, you can just prepend it with slash u, which represents unicode representation. And one thing you should not be confused is, so if I'm having string and s equal to c, this is illegal, because you can't assign a character to a string. And here you can see quick fix also is not giving any cast. So this is another way of confusing you. If you perform it casting, still you can't assign a character to a string. This is another way of confusing you, because by default when we at least see casting, we feel that it can be stored into a string because explicit casting is done. But whether explicit casting is made by you or not, a character can never be assigned to a string. A character can never be casted to a string. So this is another way of confusing you with regard to the types. And another thing is, always do remember that string s equal to, you can have null like this, but sometimes they will confuse you by giving something like this. So this is illegal. You can't have quotes. So null, it should be without quotes only. This is another way of confusing you by giving quotes. And another things which you need to remember is the operator precedence also you just go through, because that is also very much important for you. If given an expression, you must be able to evaluate the expression, and don't expect the expression will be with simple parentheses and brackets only. It might be confusing somewhat with values, and operators being used will be confusing. So just go through all the operator precedence, because you will be given an expression that might be asked you to evaluate the expression. So in that case, you need to be familiar with the complete operators precedence. So just go through the operator precedence chart. And another thing you also should be familiar with is all the keywords of Java. So I hope you remembered. I have shown you a 50 keyword chart that's there in the PBL app material as well. Even you can just Google it and see what are the keywords in Java. So all the 50 keywords you need not be familiar, but just once go through, at least give a reading to all the 50 keywords. And you should be also understanding that among all those 50 keywords, const and goto are the two keywords that are not used, but still they are reserved words which you can't use it for your identifiers. I mean for your variable names or for your method names like that. So const, const and goto are the two keywords that are not in use. So those things you should be understanding it, but still they are reserved words only. And other three keywords, you should be knowing their versions, because out of 50 keywords, 47 are only being evolved since version 1 onwards. Strict FP is one of the keyword that has been added only from Java 1.2. So you should be knowing that. That's one keyword that has been only since 1.2 version, strict FP. And this particular strict FP keyword can be used only for classes or methods and interfaces. And the purpose of this particular keyword is because when you are FP is nothing but a floating point. I think you already understood when I said the keyword strict FP. So FP is nothing but the floating point, and this strict FP, when you are doing, you by default what happens is when you run this Java code that contains methods with floating point operations, what happens is it will be the precision value will be changing. The precision value will be changing from one platform to other platform. And if you don't want the precision value to be changed from one platform to other platform, then what you have to do is whatever the method you have containing this floating operations, there what you should do is you should use this strict FP. That's the reason you can use this strict FP keyword for class or interface or for a method that contains operations involving floating variables. So all that you should be familiar with, and that's one thing you need to understand. Strict FP keyword, which has been added only from 1.2 version. And another keyword which also required is assert function, assert keyword. So this assert keyword is added only from 1.4 version. So assert keyword is added only from 1.4. Before that you don't have this assert keyword, and basically it will be used for declaring any expected boolean condition. And this is one important keyword which you can expect in the exam. Assert keyword, which was added only from 1.4 version, basically use it to declare an expected boolean condition. And let me show you its usage very quickly. Now suppose if I am having some value int age equal to, let me give 15, and how you can use that is assert age less than or equal to 18 colon, we will just display a message invalid age. Now what you can just do is let's just display that age. Now what should happen is when I just do right click and click on run, it should only display me the age. Okay, it should actually display me the age, invalid age. Okay, so this is one thing which you need to remember. If age is being displayed instead of the assert condition what you have given, one thing what you need to check for is you need to check whether this assert is enabled or not. You need to check whether this assert is enabled or not. For that what you have to do is in Eclipse IDE, you have to go to window, go to the preferences, and then expand Java and go to the installed JREs. And here what you need to do is you just need to select the JRE, whatever the JRE currently you are using, select it and click on edit. Yeah, so here you can see by default it is not enabled. So what you just need to do is -EA. So when you write -EA, it you are just asking it to enable assertions. You are asking the JRE to enable assertions. That's what -EA stands for. -EA stands for enable assertions. And click on finish and then click on apply and close. So now once let's run this and see. Still it's not coming. Just a second. Invalid page. Was it added? Install JREs. edit hyphen ea, it was added, finish, apply, apply and close. Yes. Okay, let me just change this sign, otherwise greater than or equal to 18. So here you can see what you are getting, invalid age. So this is the use of assertion. So here you can see exception will be raised. If age is valid, then only it will be returned. Otherwise, it will just raise the exception. So this is the purpose of the assertion. So I hope you understood. And this assert keyword is also added only since Java 1.4 version. And prior to that, you don't have this assert keyword. So you might be given some assert condition like this, and you might be asked to predict the output, or you might be asked to tell from which version this particular assert was added. All that you need to be familiar with. So assert keyword also added only since 1.4. And similarly, one more keyword you need to be familiar with is enum keyword. Enum keyword is also added from JDK 5, that is 1.5. And before Java 5, we don't have generics as well as enum. Generics and enum were added only since Java 5. So that's what I was saying before. Since Java 1 onwards, we don't have this all 50 keywords. So strictfp, assert, and enum were added later, where strictfp was added from 1.2, assert keyword was added since 1.4, and enum keyword was added since 1.5. And enum is used to declare enumerated constants, and you can just use it like a class. Only thing is, instead of using the keyword class, you will just use the keyword enum, and it is used to declare constants. Like if I take the example enum space compass, and in that I am going to declare four variables: north, east, west, south. You don't need to define the type for that. No need to define the type. By default, the types are going to be enum type itself. By default, the types are going to be enum type itself. Here you can see, I'm just for your understanding, I'm writing enum compass, and here you can just declare north, east, west, south. So this is how you will be declaring. So you don't need to define the type also. By default, these are values of type enum itself. So, and here you can see I'm using capital letters, and this is the naming convention. Even though it's not mandatory to use, you can even use small letters, but this is the naming convention generally that will be used as per industry standards, saying that these are not of normal variables, these are of enumerated variables. Here you can see how it is being referred, talent dot compass dot. Okay, spelling mistake. Anyway, so this is how you will be using that in the programs. So you directly use them as compass dot north, compass dot east, compass dot west, compass dot south. And by default, all these north, east, west, south are variables which are static and final. By default, all these are static and final variables. So that point need to be understood. So you can't modify them, and they are static and final. So that's the reason you can directly use them along with the enum name. Here, instead of using the class keyword, we are just using the enum keyword. That's it. So here you can access them as compass dot north, compass dot east, compass dot west, compass dot south. Something like that, you can directly use them. And this is the enum usage, and mostly these will be used with switch conditions. Generally, we'll be using along with switch condition, and when you will be dealing with something like directions, or when you are dealing with something like days of the week, or when you are dealing with something like months. I mean, your application require. Then what you do is you will just declare enum days of the week or enum months, and then you will be defining all the constants within that particular enum days of the week. You will define Monday to Sunday. Similarly, enum months, you will define all the constants January to December, and in your application directly you will be using month dot that particular month, something like that. And there is a function called ordinal function. Just remember this name, ordinal. This ordinal function of enum will be returning the index of this particular enum value. Like north will be at index 0, east will be at index 1, west will be at index 2, and south will be at index 3. Just to know the index value, you will be using the ordinal function. So that's what you just need to remember with regard to the keywords. So far what I have discussed was regarding the keywords, and I just explained you regarding strict FP, which came in 1.2 version, that ensures same precision value to be returned on various platforms irrespective of the underlying architecture. And this strict FP can be used only for the classes and methods. And assert keyword, which I have shown you just now, so it is coming only from 1.4 version, so it is used to raise the assertion error. So that's what the use of assert condition. And enum keyword, which came since 1.5, used for defining enum constants, just like what I have shown you here. That's what the enum use is for. And this is what you just need to remember with regard to the keywords. So these might be some of the things that you can expect on language fundamentals. I have just discussed on language fundamentals what are the questions you might be expecting. So one is the number systems, as I just said. The other one, the types, which I have just shown you now. So just be thorough with all of those, and then these particular keywords also you just remember. And other things that you can expect from logic, the language fundamentals is the control flow statements. So the control flow statements, you might be already familiar with all the 9 control flow statements, but still once go through that. And one thing which you just need to remember with regard to the control flow is you might be given a simple while of 1, but that is illegal in Java. Just remember that fact, because in C or C++ you can use while of 1. That means within the while condition, instead of giving a particular condition, you can directly give 1, saying it, I know when to break. That's possible with C or C++, but in Java, just remember that is error. You can't directly write while of 1 like that. You have to use the condition, or you have to use true, but you can't write 1 like that, because 0 and 1 are not treated as false and true in Java. You have to use the small letters false and true for Boolean conditions. So just remember that fact also with regard to Boolean. And control flow statements also, as I said. So you just need to once have a go through with all the 9 control flow statements, that is selection statements, if else ladder and switch, and looping statements for while and do while, and jumping statements break, continue and return. So once just go through. So you might be asked, just to confuse you, some twist might be given, something like one of the question which I have received during my exam, I'm just sharing. So I was asked a question where I was given a return type and a method name, and the arguments are byte and a double, byte and a double. And now I was asked to find the type of the return type. What should be the type of the return type? And in the options I got byte, int, long, double, something like that. So what should be the return type? So always do remember, when you are getting such question asking you to predict the return type for a given method with a given arguments, you always try and choose the option that will be widening. That will be widening. What do you mean by widening? So as I have given you the example, return type and method name, and within the brackets arguments are byte and double. So in that case, your return type should be the widening one, not the narrowing one. So use the double. use the double will be the return type. Something like that you should be predicting. And this is one thing which I wanted to inform you. And next thing is always remember one more fact with regard to the uh, what do you say? Just remember that whenever you are given a constructor, the constructor will be always getting the type of the, I mean, the access specifier. The access specifier of a constructor will be always the class or the higher one. The constructor will be having the same access specifier as the class. That means if the class is declared as public, then the constructor also will be of the type public only, whether you declare it or not. So the access specifier of constructor will hold the access specifier of the class. Just remember this statement. The access specifier of the constructor will hold the access specifier of the class. This is the point need to be understood. And similarly, another point you also need to remember is an overriding method should always use the same access specifier that was used by the parent or the higher one. I repeat my statement. An overriding method, when I say overriding method, understand it is in the subclass. So an overriding method should always use the same access specifier that is used by the parent or the higher one. I mean, for example, if the parent class is having a method that is declared as protected, if the parent class is having a method declared as protected, then what access specifier can be used by the subclass overriding method? So subclass can it use private? Definitely not. Can it live without any access specifier? Definitely not, because if it don't use any access specifier, it indicates default, which is lesser than the protected access specifier. So the subclass overriding method should use either protected access specifier for the overriding method or public. So just remember this, because you will be given code snippets and you will be asked to find which of the method declarations is legal by the subclass. I hope you are understanding what I am saying, because you will be given a small code snippet containing superclass and subclass, no statements in that particular methods, but you will be given a structure where a superclass is there and then a subclass will be there, and then if the if the overriding method should be there in the subclass, which of the following is a valid method declaration? This is how you will be given a question, and in that case, what you should choose is, so as per the statement what I given. So overriding method should always use the same access specifier that was used by the parent or the higher one, but never the lower one. That's why I gave the example of a protected method in a parent class. So the child class overriding method must use either protected or public, but should not leave the access specifier blank, because if no access specifier is mentioned, it by default becomes default, which cannot be the version matches with the parent type or the higher type. If parent is also not having any access specifier, fine, child also need not give, because if parent is not specifying, then the method access specifier is default, so child also can leave it to be default. But when parent have def- defined that particular access specifier as protected, child cannot leave it without giving the access specifier. Child must and should give either protected or public, which will be the higher version. So remember that point also. And most, according to my knowledge, you will be getting 40% code snippets only out of the 100 percentage. You will be getting 40% of the code snippets, where you need to predict the output, or you need to find the correct or valid declaration. All that things only you will be getting. So for that reason, I'm just giving you all these tips. And another thing what you need to remember with regard to this oops or inheritance is this keyword uses, final keyword uses. I hope you have remembered my sessions. So all those important points once again go through. This keyword and this particular super keyword uses, you need to be familiar with regard to the oops or inheritance concepts. So this constructor you might be given, and check whether it was given as the very first argument or the second argument. Similarly, the super constructor call also, It has to be the very first statement inside a constructor only. You cannot call the super constructor from a method of the subclass. Compulsory the calling should happen only from the subclass constructor, which has to be the very first statement. So just see all those things. And another code snippet you might also be expected is, oh, if super constructors are defined parameterless and a subclass object is being created, then the order of execution will be super constructor will be first called and then the subclass constructor. I hope you remembered when I have explained that with output. So when you are creating object for the subclass, by default super parameterless constructor will be invoked first before the subclass constructor gets executed. So once just go through that particular uses which I have discussed with regard to the super and this uses. And similarly final uses also you need to be familiar with, where I have said you final can be used along with variables which are you meant for declaring final constants. Final methods cannot be overridden but can be overloaded. So just carefully observe, if you are given a code snippet that contains a final method and if overloading is there, don't go for error option. It is valid declaration. The code will compile properly. Mostly you will be given some code snippets like that and you will be asked if compile time error will happen or if the code runs smoothly, or if compile time error happens, at what line the compile time error happens, all that also will be asked by you. So just go through all that information once again. And next we have discussed the after oops or inheritance. I have discussed the abstraction, packages and exception handling. So with regard to that you need to understand few things I have already discussed. So an abstract class can never be declared final. This is the first thing which you need to remember. An abstract class can never be declared final. Similarly, an abstract method also can never be declared final, because abstract methods are meant for being overridden by the children. So if you declare final an abstract method, then it can never be overridden by the child. So simple point you just need to remember is abstract and final together you cannot have. You cannot have abstract and final seen together. So that's one point which you need to remember with regard to abstract classes. And abstract class can also be there without even a single abstract method. I think you remember that point also. And another point which you need to be familiar with is you you cannot use synchronized keyword for variables. This is one thing which you can also expect. Synchronized keyword cannot be used for variables. Synchronized keyword can be used only along with methods. This is another point which you need to remember. And another thing which you also must remember is interfaces. Variables are by default public and public static final, and even though you don't use those keywords, you can say that by default interface variables are public static final. This is one thing which I said you. And an interface method can never have these keywords. What are those keywords? Final, static, protected, private, volatile, transient. These are the keywords which can never be used for interface methods. Just remember that point. So interface methods can never have these keywords which I just stated. Interface methods can never be declared as final, static, protected, private, transient, volatile. Because in code snippets you will be given something like these things are very simple. But if you have not explored, then you will be failing to answer the correct option. So for that reason I'm just telling you all these things. And another thing which you also need to remember is whenever an object is just assigned with a value null, that doesn't mean that the object is removed from the heap. Remember that point also. If an object is just initialized as null, that doesn't mean that object is removed from the heap. So it will be completely removed from heap only on executing the method runtime.getRuntime.gc. With regard to garbage collection, this point I stated you. I have also demonstrated you by showing a small piece of code. So runtime.getRuntime method.gc. Without invoking that method, the object will never be destroyed from the heap. So making an object itself as null doesn't mean the object is removed from heap. Remember this point. So if you are given a code snippet asking you to find which references are active and find number of objects that are ready for the garbage collector, just make sure that the references that are no longer being used for the next subsequent statements, only those references are said to be ready for the garbage collector. So remember that point and see. My main uh, point which I wanted to convey you is observe the code snippet very carefully, because all the options make you feel that everything is suitable for that particular code snippet. So carefully observe and remember the theoretical concepts which I taught you. Accordingly, try to choose the option, because almost every option will look very similar. Every option will look very similar. So in that case, your theoretical knowledge plays a crucial role for making you pick the correct option, because compile time error you might be familiar with. I mean, by seeing that code snippet, you might get the answer. You will be getting a compile time error, but you need to understand at which particular line compile time error comes, because you will be given options not only to choose compile time error, but also you will be given options saying that compile time error occurs at line 1, compile time error occurs at line 3, compile time error occurs at line 6. This is how they will be giving options. So in that case, your theoretical knowledge plays a very crucial role in for choosing at which line compile time error occurs. That's the reason I am saying observe the code snippet to find which of the references are active and which of the references are no longer in use. Accordingly, choose how many objects will be ready by the garbage collector collection. So all those things you can only understand by seeing the code snippet carefully and examine which of the object references are assigned to the some other references. There will be several references made, so you need to find the references that are no longer used by the subsequent statements following the code. Accordingly, you need to calculate, or mean you need to count the number of objects that will be ready by the garbage collector to remove from heap. And don't blindly pick the answer by just seeing object set to null. If object is set to null, that doesn't mean that object is removed from heap, because object will be removed only on running the method runtime dot get runtime dot gc method only. Until then, the reference is only destroyed. That means the implicit pointer from stack to the heap is destroyed. That's it. That is what the point you need to understand, because we already have discussed whenever you create a object, class name space reference variable equal to new constructor, then what is happening? So the reference variable is stored in the stack and implicit pointer being established by JVM to the heap allocation. So when you are just setting the reference variable to null, it's only the pointer being destroyed, not the actual object destroyed from the heap. So observe carefully the code snippet before you answer anything. And that's what with regard to that. And another thing which you also need to be familiar with is the arrays. Arrays concepts also very important. So from arrays also you can expect a question at any cost. Definitely you'll be getting one question on arrays concept. So just carefully observe all the array things. So I hope you already know, but still let me just show you very quickly. I think most of you already know. So you can have something like this. This is illegal, so you cannot just write like this without size being specified. So compulsory you need to specify size, and when you specify size, again this will be illegal. So again this will be illegal. So you cannot have initialization and size being specified at same statement. So when you are specifying I mean initializing values, remove the size, because this is how you might be given. So if you are given something like this, pick the option error, compile time error, because when you are initializing, no size to be specified, but still you can write like this new int, but you can't specify the size. You can't specify the size. And similarly you can also be given something like this. And so in this case also it will be wrong, even though size is not being specified. So compulsory you need to have the separator. You need to have the separator for saying two-dimensional. So just brackets will not be sufficient. So you need to have the separator, something like this. So just to carefully observe, because it seems very simple question. The questions looks very simple, which you already know, and you might be feeling that why so silly questions were being asked. But just carefully observe. There might be very minute thing that will be noted only on careful observation, and that's what you just need to be familiar with. And next, after this abstraction things, we have discussed about packages. So with regard to packages, you need to be familiar with the access specifiers table. So that is which I have demonstrated you also. So the public, private, protected, and default, that is no access being specified. So just once go through the table. So public can be accessed from everywhere, whereas private can be accessed only from the class in which it was declared. Default means it can be accessed throughout the package from subclasses or non-subclasses. Protected means can be accessed from the entire package as well as the subclasses from other packages. So once go through that, because a small code snippet might be asked with regard to the wrapper class, packages, and you might be asked to find which of the things are valid or invalid, or find the error. Find the error at which place, like that you will be asked. So that's the reason, once go through that packages hierarchy table. And then with regard to exception handling, uh, so you just need to be familiar with the type of exceptions. And just to see in the given code snippet, if the supermost class comes first and then the subclasses, which I have already said you, for a single try you can have multiple catch blocks, but always make sure that the subclass types, subtype exceptions comes first and then the super type. Because if the super type comes first, then everything will be caught by the super type, not letting the subtypes to be handled, and which is also error in Java. So that's the reason you should be familiar with even that. And yeah, with regard to exception handling, definitely you can expect 2 to 3 questions, and that too in the form of code snippets only. As I said you, in the form of code snippets you will be given, and you will be asked to check if the code works fine, or if it is error, and if it is error due to which particular block the error is. All that will be asked with regard to exception handling. So just go through that particular types of exceptions also you need to be familiar with. And another way is, you might be given some simple code and you will be asked to check if it is fine or not. In that case you need to be familiar with the statement being used. If it is something related to some checked exceptions, you already know that all checked exceptions must and should be handled. If checked exceptions are not handled, at least they should be declared as throws in the method declaration. If in the method declaration there is no throws class, and if the checked exceptions are not even handled with the try catch blocks, then also it will be error. Because we have discussed about checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions. So checked exceptions are those which must and should be handled during the compile time itself, because they will be checked at compile time itself. So they should be either handled with the try catch blocks, or you should declare the method that contains this checked exceptions throws declaration. So once go through that, because you can expect compulsory a code snippet which might contain some statements that involves these checked exceptions but not handled or but not declared. In that case you should not go for the option the code works fine. So just see if it is declared at least throws. If it is declared throws, again it should be handled by the calling method. If it is declared throws, it should be handled by the calling method. If not in that method, at least by the calling method it should be handled. Otherwise it leads to handled by the JVM itself. Again it will be thrown out. So just go through that types of exceptions once, and understand the categories of checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions, so that you will be easily able to answer that code snippet that contains this exception blocks. And next we have discussed about wrapper classes. After exception handling we have discussed about wrapper classes. So just remember the point that wrapper classes is just meant for converting primitive to object type or object to primitive type. And As per the bits, you just remember primitive to object type conversion is nothing but auto boxing, and object to primitive type conversion is nothing but the unboxing. So this is the simple point which I just said with regard to the wrapper classes. And wrapper conversions, I think all of you will be familiar with, and nobody will make mistake, I think, because it's very simple concept of auto boxing and unboxing. And then after that wrapper classes, we have discussed about the JUnit, and in JUnit also you just need to be familiar with the present version. So if being asked, you just answer that JUnit 5x is the present version. I don't know whether it will be asked or not, but if asked the present version of JUnit, just answer 5x is the present version. And since 4x version onwards, we are using JUnit as annotation based. That point also you need to be familiar with. So since 4x version, JUnit is annotation based, and remember all the annotations. Once go through the JUnit PDF, which annotations are meant for what. So at the rate before class will be invoked only once. At the rate after class also will be invoked only once. At the rate before and at the rate after will be invoked with regard to every test case, and every method that is meant for performing the test case, compulsory it need to have the annotation at the rate test. So just see carefully, if you are given a code snippet which doesn't have this particular annotation at the rate test, then don't say it is a test case. So just carefully look whether the annotation is given or not. If no annotation, it no longer be a test case, it behaves like a normal method of a normal class. So compulsory, if a method is written exclusively for checking the test case, compulsory you need to have the annotation at the rate test. So no annotation, no test case. It's just a normal method. So remember that point. So, and assert class methods also, we have seen few of the assert class methods. So assert equals is the one which will be used to check if two conditions are equal or not. If they are equal, then it returns true, otherwise no. So that's what we have discussed about that JUnit. And JUnit test suite also you might be getting a question. So test suite is mainly meant for grouping multiple test case classes. In order to group multiple test case classes, you will be using the test suite. That's the simple point you just need to remember. Because if you create multiple test case classes, you need to run each and every test case class. Rather than that, if I group multiple test case classes as a test suite, then I can just run the test suite, which will automatically run all the test case classes that are grouped into it. So that's the advantage of the test suite. And that's what we have discussed with regard to JUnit. And just go through the all the annotations and the test case test suite. And then we have seen the IO streams. So with regard to IO streams, you need to be familiar with the serialization concept basically. So which I have shown you with a demonstration program also by using the serializable interface. And along with that, I have said you the uses of keyword like transient. So just once again go through that keyword uses. So it's very simple. Using a keyword transient for any variable, for that means that variable will not be part of the serialization. So serialization is nothing but saving the state of an object and restoring back when required, that is deserialization. So serialization means saving the state of the object before it will be lost, and using deserialization concept you are going to restore the object state. That means you are going to recover all the values of that particular object except the variables that are declared transient and static. Except the variables that are declared transient and static. So those variables that are declared static or transient can never be serialized, can never be involved in serialization. So just remember that point also as part of the serialization. And IO streams are part of the java.io package, so they are not part of the default lang package. Just remember that point also. And any object you want to involve in serialization must and should make sure that class implements serializable interface. That class must and should implement the serializable interface. So that point also need to be understood. And by just implementing serializable interface, you don't need to override any method, because serializable interface contains only default methods, so no need of any overriding mandatory. So that point also you need to be remembered. And character streams and byte streams are the two types of streams which we have discussed under the streams concept. And I also stated that character streams are the mostly used streams than compared to the byte streams. So from Java 1.2 version onwards, we are being using character streams than compared to byte streams. So that's what I have discussed with regard to the IO streams. And yeah, that's it. We have syllabus for assessment milestone 1, and up to that I have covered. And I hope I have explained each and every concept in very detail. And with regard to logic building problems, once again I recommend you to go through all the problems that are there with logic building our plan M1 and M2A, because if you practice them, you will be able to solve any problem given to you, and don't expect you will be getting one from this particular set only. You don't get any problem from this particular set. So but just it gives you confidence that you will be able to solve any problem if you have solved these problems. I already stated in my last session also, the only area which you should focus to get full marks is the logic building problem, because MCQs, it's not going to be that easy where you can get 100 out of 100. It's only the logic building problem which you can be at least confident enough that you will be able to solve and get through all the test cases to get 100 out of 100. And the average of it, you should be able to get the benchmark in order to continue with this talent next training. So that's what from my end. So only to just give you a quick recap on this particular session. Only to give you a quick recap of all these topics up to IO streams. I just asked you to come for today. So tomorrow there will not be any session. So you can just go ahead with your preparation for day after tomorrow's exam. And again, I will meet you on Monday for discussing the next topics. I'll start with RDBMS, SQL, JDBC from Monday's class. So if you have any queries with regard to assessment test, you can just post it in the comment section. With regard to any topics, any queries, you can ask it in the comment section. If no queries, you can straight away give your hall ticket number in the comment section. Any queries, you can ask in the comment section. If no queries, post your roll number for attendance. So I don't see any queries being asked. So I hope all of you are comfortable with the topics up to IO streams. That's for your assessment 1 exam. I wish you all the best for your first assessment, and I hope all of you will be able to clear the first assessment, and I'll see all of you for the further training as well. Once again, all the best and bye.